Hello, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Insight event. Today, we are celebrating International Day of People with Disabilities. So welcome. My name is Nathan Geering, and I will be chairing this event this evening. I was the Artistic Director of the Special Olympics opening ceremony in 2017, and I'm also the creator of the Rationale Method of Audio Description. I go by the pronouns of he and him. And in terms of my physical description, I am mixed race, so I'm half black and half white. I have about 2 inches worth of afro hair on the top of my head, and smooth haircut around the edges. It's nice and short. I have a short beard that's also black. I am wearing a bright orange sweater, which has a kind of a smooth feel to it, so a bit like a kind of sound, really nice kind of smooth feel to it, but it has a kind of like a brown patchwork pocket on my left chest, and that's a bit more of a rougher texture, so it's a bit more of like a kind of like a rough texture as you move your fingers along it. But yeah, that's my description of myself. Tonight we're going to be delving really deep into how we can have a truly disability inclusive art sector moving forwards as we start to recover from the impact of COVID-19. And I have an absolutely incredible panel with me that are really going to help us dig deep to see how we can really try and evoke meaningful positive movement and change within the sector. So without further ado, I'd like to invite each panelist up to just give a brief introduction of themselves and just to talk a little bit about their practice, as well as give a bit of a physical description. So if we could start with Alan.
Hello, thanks for this invitation. I am happy to be here. I am an opera singer, and I had the great opportunity to sing last September and October with the Opera House in Magic Flute, and to working with all of my colleagues, my coaches of Yes Parker Young Artist Program. So thank you for this invitation, Nathan.
And Alan, could you give a little bit of a description of yourself?
Of course. Now I am with white shirt. I am sit front of the pianoforte because it's is the best position for me, and I have I have cut hair, and I think my color of skin is like, can I say, like brown in my imagination, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alan. Joe, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. I'm a white cis man in his early 20s. I have dark, bushy hair that's really long at the moment and needs a haircut. I also have dark eyebrows. I'm wearing a very thick woolen dark sweater, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a freelance dance artist, and I specialize in ballet. I use crutches and a wheelchair, and I was very lucky to have worked with the Royal Ballet for the Paralympic homecoming ceremony. And I've just finished a UK tour with Ballet Cymru in Wales, in Giselle.
Brilliant, amazing. Elizabeth?
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Arifien, and my pronouns are she, her. My hair is a dyed kind of red-orange colour, and it goes down to kind of midway on my arm. I'm wearing a black silk shirt, and it's very soft to feel. I have light skin, quite white, pale skin, and I'm joining today from a company I co-founded with Charlotte Edmonds called Move Beyond Words. And we amplify the voices of those with dyslexia within the creative sector. And we do that through workshops, films, live performances, a podcast, and soon to be workshops as well in the new year.
Wicked, absolutely amazing. And Andrew?
Thanks, Nathan, and evening, everyone. Delighted to be with you. I'm a middle-aged white male, he, him, wheelchair user, wearing glasses and a tartan jumper. I'm sitting in my studio in Northamptonshire in front of a bright orange blind. I'm a cultural consultant and broadcaster. I've been working across the cultural industries for about 30 odd years, and I'm a National Council member of Arts Council England, Governor of the Royal Shakespeare Company, Chair of the BFI Disability Screen Advisory Board, Trustee of BAFTA and Welsh National Opera, and I also co-created the UK Disability Arts Alliance, We Shall Not Be Removed, last year.
Wow. See, I told you we had an incredible group of panelists, right? They've all achieved such incredible, amazing stuff. Okay, so just to let the audience at home know, if you have any questions at any point, if you want to just pop the questions into the comment section, what we will do is towards the end of the panel discussion, we will try and answer as many of those questions as we possibly can. But right now, we're going to jump into some questions that's been prepared especially for this panel. So the first question is, what are the major benefits to a disability inclusive sector? Are there any kind of like benefits that the audience at home may not even be aware of? And I'd like to pose that question first to Joe.
Yeah, so I believe for me, the major benefits are it's really exciting to have integration in things. So I find it really exciting to learn from one another. And I think what's really important as well is with the arts, with audiences watching them, you want to see a true representation of, you know, the people around us in the world. And I think if you don't have that true representation, you won't be able to inspire the next generation. So I think it's really important that you have someone that you can identify with and be like, yes, I can do it as well. But I think it's really important that we also learn from one another too.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, that's an extremely valid point. And, you know, there are approximately 14 million people in the UK with disabilities. So we're a massive part of the population, and we'll normalise differences the more that we're seeing ourselves reflected out in mainstream culture and media.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Andrew?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I mean, deaf, disabled, neurodiverse people make up over 20% of this country's population, and around 12% of the pre-pandemic arts audience in England. And the campaign I founded, We Shall Not Be Removed, had disabled members representing every role and capacity in the creative industries. So it's simply wrong that we are not represented in the art sector as artists, as employees, as we should be. Disabled talent is out there, but very often it's opportunity that isn't.
Yeah, so true, so true. Alan?
I would say that it's impressive. I agree with all of you, and I would say also one of the benefits is, as Joe said, the integration that we can have between all of us, all the things that we can learn, because I think everyone, we can learn different things about music, about ballet, about how can we in these disability things, how can we we act, for example, how can we perform on stage the different things. So I think it's really great to have this benefit and to have this inclusion, because every in Mexico we say every person is have different thoughts and have different world inside their minds. So I think it's really interesting to learn each other by different people.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is just like the more people that there are around the table, the more chance for new and exciting things to be discovered and new perspectives to be kind of like, approached. And yeah, I just think it just will definitely create like a richer hotbed for creativity and inclusion within the arts if everybody is at the table and has the opportunity. Andrew, you touched on this next question a little bit in when you answered the last one, actually. What for you is the biggest barrier to a truly disability inclusive art sector?
Well, for me, the biggest barrier is a lack of understanding about ableism. And outside of the disability community, ableism is still really a very largely unfamiliar term. But assuredly, as racism, misogyny, homophobia, ableism is a major barrier and wrecks opportunities for disabled people. Ableism applies to a wide range of situations and settings, from limited physical access to a limited understanding of the support deaf, neurodiverse, disabled people need to succeed. It also acts as a conditioning agent, inhibiting disabled people's ambitions and non-disabled people's expectations of what disabled people can do. So for me, ableism is a major barrier.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you feel that we can overcome that? What steps do you feel we can start to make to overcome ableism?
We need to recognize what it is. Society needs to recognize what it is. And there needs to be an open conversation about it. And in fact, yesterday, one of the organizations I'm involved with, the BFI, published a film about ableism in the film and TV sectors. And that's been published on the BFI website. And there's lots of information online about what ableism is. And I think it's important to recognize it to then be able to do something about it and remove it from working methods.
Yeah, definitely agree. Elizabeth?
I did something, and I think it's important to share actually, because I think it's an actual barrier in itself. But I read that question differently from and also the way that you'd articulated it, I processed it differently. So I think that's something worth sharing as a barrier personally, is processing information and having that information delivered in a way that's accessible to me, which is more of a personal barrier as opposed to how we take those next steps. So yeah, I thought that was important to share.
Yeah, definitely. And so could you tell us how you interpreted that question, or how that question came across to you then when you first received it?
Yeah, so I read that as or processed it and read it in the notes as the biggest barrier that I face as an individual kind of in the sector. So it's so slight, but it's interesting because those small barriers make such a huge difference. And in an application form or in an evaluation or something like that, that information can, if it's not delivered in an accessible way, can create just wrong information, or you're delivering information that isn't quite right. So yeah, it's quite interesting how we're all processing information.
Great. And just to follow up on that, so what ways in which could, like, for example, the audience at home be mindful of, and what ways could they make their information more accessible
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I'm glad you're asking that question. I think there's so many different ways, and they're quite easy ways that we can make information more accessible. For instance, in an email, if you're sending a huge email with lots of information, just bullet pointing those messages that you want to get across, making sure that your sentences are concise, and that the information and the way that you're articulating things is just really clear and direct. I think people like myself with ADHD and dyslexia, we don't work well with blurred lines. We just need information to be nice and clear and concise. So just small things like that, bullet points, being in communication with one another about what your needs are. There's great resources out there that can support with that, such as access riders, or it's called an access rider, and you can get that quite easily from online. And yeah, just making sure that we're in communication about what those needs are for one another.
Brilliant. All super valuable information you're giving us there. Thank you so much. Joe?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it's been really interesting to hear like Elizabeth's point of view as well, because again, with the question, there were kind of two ways for me to interpret it. It's as a whole or something that you face individually, and so it's been really interesting to hear two differing perspectives. But I think going back to Andrew's point, ableism for me, especially in my experience, has been something that's quite prevalent. And I found that whilst there can be physical barriers, I feel like this embedded idea of ableism, it doesn't allow people to look beyond the physical barriers and think, well, how can I find a way around that? Because it's almost like an assumption is kind of made rather than thinking about how do I solve this problem. And I think for me, the biggest barrier is kind of, and I think for others in sort of my situation as well, it's attitude. And I think if people are willing to accept that these things do exist, you can learn how to change them. And I think that applies to everyone's needs. Like if you're willing to accept that these barriers do exist, you can definitely make the positive change needed to be able to say, right, well, now we can make sure that everyone has access to everything.
Yeah, most definitely. Alan?
Yeah, I think in my experience, one of the physical barrier is, for example, different signs. For example, that we can find in different walls or different screens to know when we are in places like for example the building. We sometimes need like signs umbrella that could say maybe after the lifts, for example. That say, I don't know, for example, if you want to find some places, my example is, for example, if you want to find the music library in the opera house, some sign on break can say music library in front at right, or in front at left. And other barrier that I find in my experience is in English, not really. This is really great, but we need to call the disability for the name, because in other languages, for example, we call with different words, different expression, the disability. For example, if I am blind, I am blind. But not say, for example, this is an expression in Spanish. I want to translate that, but many people say, "Oh, people who can't see." I think that we need to call the things for their names. if you are blind, or if you can, I don't know, it's necessary to have this accessibility and to find the balance between calling the things for their names and really don't feel like people is bad with us. I think we need to find this balance to be more accessible. Both group, disability and not disability people.
Yeah, great. Yeah, some really poignant insights there. Some great insights there. Thank you for that. So the next question is, what does disability inclusive leadership look like in the arts, and how can we nurture and support more disabled leaders within our sector? So I'd like to direct that question to Elizabeth first.
Yeah. So yeah, what does disability inclusive leadership look like? Yeah, I mean, I think conversations, having stimulating conversations, that point Alan's making about language and what we kind of call a disability, or the word disability is a whole, we could spend an hour talking about the word disability and the relationship independently that we have to that word, and especially for someone who's neurodivergent, my relationship to that word. And that's a whole big topic of conversation in itself, is kind of the language that we use. But it's important, and that conversation is important to be had in those leadership roles. And I think speaking to people who are differently abled, having conversations directly. I think there's guidelines on employment and recruitment and policies that should be in place. And yeah, there's some fantastic resources out there that everyone should have access to. On our websites, there should be a resource page on kind of big kind of arts organizations that talk about all these important resources, like the Creative Differences Handbook that Universal Music created. There's the CIPD Neurodiversity at Work, which is a really great guideline as well that people should be aware of in leadership roles. And yeah, I think just more spaces and hubs that we can have important conversations like this one. And yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is communication.
Yeah, definitely. Communication is super important, and just sharing that knowledge and information. Andrew?
Well, we need some disabled leaders there for a start, and they need to be visible. And there really are very few of us in any kind of leadership position. As I said earlier, talent is out there, opportunity isn't. Expectations of disabled people need to be raised by the sector, but also we need to change what the leadership model is itself, because there are huge expectations of leaders today, which might not sit very well when you're managing a very severe disability. So we need to rethink what leadership is, as many of us actually exert influence but have no actual power. I think we also need to encourage our colleagues to come out about disability, because whilst the disability-led sector is really very small, Arts Council diversity statistics tell us about 10% of artistic directors declare a disability, 11% of CEOs, which means that disability is much more present in the mainstream industry than it actually appears to be. Yet neither I nor the industry know who these individuals, many often with invisible disabilities, actually are. So it's important to come out, self-declare, and talk about disability publicly, because we need more voices, we need more advocacy to embody our true strength in the sector.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really interesting point you make about leadership and, you know, the current models of leadership that are in place and things like that. I think the leadership models have taken us to a certain point, but in order for us to really move forward progressively, we really need to explore different forms of leadership that actually has space for everybody to be a part of that. Alan?
I'm going to take the point of Elizabeth and Andrew. I think exactly we need more communication, more and talk about more public about disability. And I want to share when communication, as Elizabeth said, when communication is the main thing between disabled and not disabled people, we can really do great things. And I want to share this experience when we performed Magic Flute. When we had a chat about how can we work on stage, we found the great idea to have an earpiece on stage, and all the people that was with me in that moment, we tried to find these different ways to work in a good experience for them and for me in this case. So I am totally agree with my colleagues in this panel that communication and talk about disability without feel scared could be really great, because in this way we can really find more inclusive spaces for all the people.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you loud and clear. Joe?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of pick up on what both Andrew and Alan were saying, and I totally agree. And, you know, it was interesting that Andrew said something about people don't declare their disabilities. And, you know, that if you think about it, that's quite shocking, because you should feel like you're in a safe enough environment to be able to say, look, this is what I need, and this is how we're going to do it to make things better. And I know from my personal experience, I have found that in some environments that's not been an option for me. So I've had to, you know, keep things back. And, you know, there have been times when I've been quite open with some of my bosses, and, you know, sometimes the reactions that you get are not the best, and that makes you feel like, you know, if you're not going to advocate for me, then I have to advocate for myself for everything. And I think that's something that people who do not experience different accessible needs, you know, they don't understand. Like, you have to keep advocating for yourself all the time and be like, you know, I have to fight for this. And sometimes if you come up against someone who doesn't really understand that and creates an environment that doesn't feel safe, that can be really difficult as well. But I think going forward, we definitely want to have more open, honest conversations, and we need to learn from each other. And I really do think that by sharing these lived experiences that we all have in these panels, you know, that could do some good, especially if you want to think about having more disabled leaders in the inclusive arts sector, because hopefully by sharing all these lived experiences, the next generation who are going to come up, they won't encounter any of these issues. And I think that is the main driving force, you know, towards the future.
Yeah, definitely. We got to make it better for the future generations to come, 100%. And so, would you say that it's then super important for example, when you're trying to communicate to somebody who is not listening? Do you feel it's super important to have people backing you up and advocating for you as well, just to the point so that power that be has no choice but to listen?
Yes, definitely. And for me, I think it's kind of been one of two ways. So when I first encountered some of the problems that I was having at work, where, you know, they weren't listening and things were being quite difficult, I, you know, went to them from quite a genuine place. And, you know, some of the things that were kind of thrown back at me, they'd make your hair turn grey, you know, with the shock kind of thing. But, you know, so it is important to have someone there that can also advocate for you, because I think a lot of the time with anyone with a different accessible need, you just feel like you're fighting like the system all the time, and you don't want to do that. You know, you want to have the same opportunities as everyone else. But when you look at others around you, and specifically with some of the work I've been doing, I've been the only dancer, you know, with a visible disability in a company. It's like they get sort of things a lot easier, or it appears that way, because they don't have to fight against everything all the time. And it was something that I kind of thought as well, like in society I felt like I've had to fight for things, but coming into an environment that's trying to be integrated, you know, it's new. There probably will be some areas where it's going to be difficult, but you don't want to keep feeling like you have to fight against something. So if you have an open and honest conversation with someone, you expect them to listen to you, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So I do think that having someone there that can advocate for you, that has a similar experience, or just really does understand, that really does help. So I think, again, in terms of disability leadership, as well as having a leader with a visible disability, there also needs to be a support network behind them that really understand the changes that need to be made and how things can progress going forward.
Yeah, there definitely does need to be a strong support system to enable, you know, the disabled leaders to be able to thrive in their leadership roles, because there's nothing worse than, you know, people being set up to fail. So yeah, the infrastructure and support systems are super important. Okay, so I'm going to go on to like a couple of questions. I'm just going to fire at specific individuals, just looking at time, because this is such rich conversation that we're having. I could be here all night. But yeah, you know, time isn't always our best friend. So Andrew, can you please outline the importance of the 7 inclusive principles and just talk a little bit about what it is for those that may not know?
Yeah, sure, Nathan. The 7 inclusive principles were developed by a consortium of cultural organizations last year in the midst of the pandemic, all related to the Disability Arts Alliance, We Shall Not Be Removed, that I set up. The principles were really there to support the sector, the cultural sector, approach reopening and reopening inclusively, specifically of disabled people, because we recognized there was a real threat about a 2-tier reopening where fit and able non-disabled people would be able to return to cultural participation first, and disabled people would be secondary. Now, alas, that has actually happened, and very many disabled people are still not coming out. But the principles speak about the supremacy of the Equality Act in all cultural policy decision-making. They talk about identifying and combating ableism, as I spoke about earlier. They talk about co-production of policy with disabled people. So things not being done to disabled people, but created with us. The necessity for clear and comprehensive information on COVID secure measures, and particularly how the customer journey needs to be thoroughly mapped for disabled audiences in this new environment. The principles also considered the necessity of engaging disabled artists and also celebrating disability in the cultural workforce. The principles can be found on the We Shall Not Be Removed website in all accessible formats. It also contains links to a wide range of free resources to support people at every level in the sector to really get to grips with what best practice looks like. And it's important that everyone from management, programmers, artists, front of house, box office, understand their implications. And I'm delighted to say that the principles have even been adopted by Arts Access Australia and being deployed at the other side of the world.
Incredible. That's having such a profound international impact. That's so brilliant. Elizabeth, as a disabled artist, what are your experiences of like working remotely?
Well, I think working remotely actually, we're often in society, people with invisible disabilities are often navigating problems all the time. And, disabilities of all kinds, we're all navigating different issues all the time. And so actually when the lockdown occurred, it was just another problem to have to deal with. And Move Beyond Words was set up in the lockdown. And we did that because we didn't feel there was the support there for people with dyslexia within the arts. And, we are often, as Joe was saying, kind of advocating for ourselves and for those changes. And sometimes people don't think to ask if you have any access needs or whether things could be altered for any differences within a space. And so, we really wanted to, be that voice that we didn't have when we're both professional artists in the industry still, but that voice that we didn't feel was there. So the podcast is there for that resource and to support people, and the workshops and things like that. So, it was a time to kind of go within and look at what was missing and to bring something back into the world that was of value. And so that's what we've done during the lockdown.
Amazing. Totally brilliant. Alan, what's been your experience of working remotely as well, actually?
It's not a good experience working remotely because first of all, I don't really like it. And then I think for my condition, for the blindness, I need and I want to learn different things, touching and feeling with my hands. So when we worked remotely, was an interesting experience because we could learn other kinds of work, but I prefer like we did 2 months ago, and I am doing now here in my hometown, working I think physically, because working remotely sometimes is quite difficult, and especially when some apps are not able to work with the programs of the phones or of the different devices, because for example, now Zoom is very, very accessible. We can have this chat remotely, but at the beginning was quite difficult to find how can I connect with all the different colleagues and different things, because sometimes the devices are not able to read all the images that we can find special on internet and on different applications that just have images and have these notes that are not possible to describe in the screens.
Mm-hmm. I feel, yeah. Okay, so what do you feel could be done then to improve your experience of working remotely?
Find this connection between the colleagues or other things, to have different videos, to have these virtual concerts, for example, And also now the applications that I can say develop these things, they have different audio descriptions to understand what is happening in the meetings or in the different situations that we are working remotely.
Okay, great, brilliant. Thanks for that insight. Super valuable, super valuable. Joe, I'd just like to ask you, like, what has been your experience of access for backstage artists, and how does that generally like compare to like front of house experience? Like, are they on a par of each other? Is there a bit of an imbalance? What are you feeling?
Yeah, so I think from my own personal experience, I felt there was a complete imbalance. So with the tour that we've just done of Giselle, we go to a lot of small theatres, and the tech crew would ring up ahead of time and they'd be like, is the theatre accessible? You know, we've got a dancer that uses a wheelchair, uses crutches. And they'd be like, yes, yeah, the theatre's accessible. But when they're saying it's accessible, they're referring to the front of house rather than the backstage area. So there's been times where, you know, someone's had to like carry me up steps, you know, I've had to go up like sitting down, find some kind of way to do that. You know, the wing space has not been great, so there were lights, and they always kind of said, you know, if there's any problems, come and speak to the stage manager and we'll see if we can move it. But then there were a couple of occasions where it was like, well, the lights have to be there and they can't be moved. So then it kind of restricted, you know, my access. So for most of the shows and most of the venues that I've done, I've, you know, had to come on and off in the same sort of wing. And obviously when you have other dancers around you as well, you know, they come off different wings and sometimes they blocked my only access route, and you have cables on the floor and that can severely impact, you know, me coming on with my chair and things like that. And yeah, there was also one venue that unfortunately I wasn't able to go to at all because it was, you know, it was completely inaccessible. So that show I had to unfortunately miss. So I think the important thing going forward that people need to think about is, rather than just thinking about the front of house, which I felt sometimes was happening, you have to think about, you know, the backstage areas as well. Yeah, and I think as well, because I also do, you know, use my crutches as well for short distances, there was kind of a little bit of a misconception that, you know, well, you can stand up on your crutches, so stairs are not going to be that much difficult for you. But, you know, when I get tired and we have tours and performances, you know, things do become a lot more difficult. So again, I think it's about having that open conversation and really sitting down and saying, okay, what do you need for your access requirements, and having those really open and honest conversations. Because I know that especially with some of the theatres we visit, you know, if they were to make it accessible, they'd probably have to do a complete remodel of the building. And I know that that is not going to be a realistic thing that can be done in a short amount of time. So, you know, it's about the communication of booking venues that you know really work very well, having those conversations, and again, just not being afraid to ask questions, because I think sometimes there was an assumption made, again, as I said, that I'm on crutches. Sometimes you can get up out your chair and it's like, well, I can't carry my stuff, you know, getting upstairs is not the easiest. So it's just having a lot more thought when it comes to things, and I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. You hear that, people at home, or you venues, step your backstage access up. Super important, super important. Okay, so the last question I'm going to quickly ask you before we hand it over to our audience for questions is, what is needed for an inclusive recovery in our sector? And I'd like to direct this question first to Andrew.
I think we've covered a lot of the ground, but you know, this pandemic has really cruelly exposed the full extent of disabled people's fragility in the arts ecosystem, and our continued cultural participation is at real risk. So I think, we need these conversations, these kind of discussions we're having tonight, but also conversations going on across the industry to ensure that disabled people are able to continue to be engaged. We've seen a small number of organizations like the RSC, Battersea Arts Centre, prioritize inclusion in their reopening plans, maintaining socially distanced performances or mandating face coverings. And the Arts Council have put a real priority on the reintegration of disabled and CEV people. And I'm really proud of that position. There just needs to be continued thought. The 7 principles, I think, offer a good roadmap for the sector itself to guide its recovery.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would add to that more data and analytics so that we can back our findings in those conversations. And then to take that further, to really look at ways of funding these changes. And that needs to be happening by our big arts organizations, which I know a lot of places are, but yeah, there could be more of it.
Great, thanks for that. Alan?
I am agree with my colleagues. Is keep with the conversations, because I think so far we have a lot of improves in the accessibility in the sector. We have different ways to arrive to the performance, but we need to keep with these chats, with this with this communication, and talk about different suggestions that we can find together with all the people that we're working day by day.
Yeah, definitely. Joe?
Yeah, so I think following on from everyone's points, I think it's definitely the open communication. I think all of us in this panel have completely different and unique and really valid experiences. So I think it's really important that organizations, you speak to as many different people as possible, because one person's experience is not going to be the same as someone else's. So it's almost like you need to understand the different spectrum of different needs. But I think on a more general note, and again, it's going back to sort of ending this ableism culture, because I think, it does exist with someone who has physical accessible needs, but I'm sure as well, it exists with someone who has an invisible disability. I think it exists within all different accessible needs. And I think at the root of it, there needs to be more of an understanding and a little bit more empathy to understand that each person's lived experience is so unique and incredibly valid. And, if you come to someone and you're trying to advocate for yourself, you're not doing it in a way to, be antagonistic. You are genuinely trying to have the same opportunities as everyone else and genuinely trying to push forward for a better future for everyone. So I think as well, if you can see someone that's, even if it's the smallest change, attempting and trying to make those steps, that goes a long way. And, it's not going to be right all the time. Mistakes will be made, but I think all of us are willing to accept that if you try and put those principles in place, it's a starting point. We have somewhere to go with this. So I think it's making the attempts to change and having those open and honest conversations, so you build on that knowledge of empathy of the experiences that we all have.
Yeah, definitely. Like, empathy is super important, and also the fact that everybody's experience is unique and valid. Like, that's super important. We need to hold that in the forefront of our minds at all times. Great. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over to the audience so they can answer some of these. Well, so you can answer some of their questions, I guess. Don't feel every single person has to answer these questions, but I'm just going to open the floor up so you can all chime in however you like with these questions. So the first question is from Elena, and she says, what are your recommendations or best ways for somebody with a disability to get involved in the arts to develop their skills?
I mean, I can come from a neurodivergent perspective. I think, you know, just taking that step, and I think, you know, a lot of people with dyslexia, ADHD, autism are kind of channeled into a creative career. And I think that's great. You know, there's so many things, that assets that we have as people who are neurodivergent that can offer so much to the creative sector. Doesn't mean that you have to go into a creative sector. And I think that's really important to stress. You know, there are incredible scientists, you know, people doing all types of jobs who have dyslexia and neurodivergent tendencies. So you don't have to go into a creative career. And I think I really want to stress that. But if you do go into a creative career, there are a lot of challenges. And I think they're often not spoken about and not given a platform to. But they are manageable, and there are spaces that can offer those support. You know, that handbook that I mentioned at the beginning, The Creative Differences, is a brilliant handbook. We as Move Beyond Words are here to support those who have who are neurodivergent and neurodiverse. So, you know, reach out, and we'd be happy to support.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, the next question is from Kyra, and she says, how can people with disabilities be better represented in classical ballet, also on stage?
Yeah, so I think for me in classical ballet, there is definitely a big gap at the moment. And I think I'm quite lucky and unique in the fact that before I acquired my disability, I was able to do vocational ballet training. And this is something that's talked about quite a lot. There's absolutely a lack of people willing to train dancers in the classical ballet technique who have a difference. And I think it comes from sort of the root of kind of how it was founded. I think people have this idea that classical ballet is only for a select group of people. And I think people need to look at it and think, you know, we need to get this into the 21st century. You know, because otherwise, if we don't do something where dancers represent the population of people in our world today, people are going to lose interest in it. And I think, especially in ballet, that is something that we don't want to happen anyway, because there's so many stereotypes that people see that they try and dismiss it, and, you know, it's the hairy fairy and it's this and it's that. So I think going forward, the representation, you know, we want to see more dancers there. You know, I'm, as much as I can, reaching out to as many companies to kind of see if it's something that they're interested in. But I think at the root of it, there needs to be more training opportunities. And regardless of where the people are going to pursue this as a professional career or not, you know, ballet and dance has so many, you know, physical and social benefits to everyone. Even if it's something that you're not going to pursue as a career later on down the line, I think you will take something away from it. So I think at the root of it, we need to get training there to be able to get the next generation of dancers there. And also, don't be afraid to put dancers, you know, with visible differences in lead roles, because I think there's a little bit of hesitancy around that sometimes, but there shouldn't be. And I think going forward, those are the things that are really important.
Yeah, totally agree. And actually, your response kind of leans into the next question, which is from Caitlin. And Caitlin says, what would you recommend to instructors or studio owners to make class more accessible and inclusive? How would you advise they talk to their disabled students? They go on to say that they had some really cruel teachers as a child.
Yeah, that's quite common, I think, you know, and even now, you know, there are certain directors in certain companies that would look at you and be like, you shouldn't be doing ballet, you know, you shouldn't be doing any type of dance because you're just not the right person. And I think there's this wonderful thing in ballet. Someone introduced it to me. So I've been in contact with a lady who's had a similar experience to me, where she trained classically and then acquired her disability, and she's guested with various ballet companies, but now she's moved into sort of like a mentorship role. And she was involved with this amazing project. It's called Universal Design of Instruction. So you really look at classwork in ballet in particular, the focus was on, but I think it works in any style of dance. And you look at the form and the function of class. So for someone who uses a wheelchair, or uses crutches or a walking frame, each translation of the movement is going to be completely different. But you look at the commonalities that you share. So, for example, if you were to do a class and you're thinking about jumping, and when I first heard that, I was like, well, how am I going to do that in my chair? But then you think jumping, the preparation is, a release from the floor. So how can I interpret that differently? So I think if there are people out there willing to look at this universal approach, we'll be at the beginning of something. It probably will take a while to get there, but it'll make things easier. So if anyone is interested, look up online the Universal Design of Instruction, and also Dance Unstuck, because there's some fabulous resources on there that shows the beginning of some really exciting things.
Brilliant. Yeah, some great examples there. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's coming to the end of our discussion, I'm afraid, my people. Like I said, I could stay here for an extra few hours, literally just listening to all your insights. Have all been super valuable. So can I just have kind of like one final word from each of you? It doesn't have to be a single word, but like a final, I guess, statement or recommendation in terms of what it is that we could do to move towards an inclusive future regarding specifically disability within the arts. And can we go to Alan first?
Thank you. I think that I want to remember some phrase of one of my coaches of the Opera House, that one day when we was working in space, he said that we need to listen all our bodies and all our persons. I think to becoming more inclusive, more accessible, the things, we need to develop all the senses. I mean, we know that we have some different conditions, but we need to open the universe, because everyone, not just us, everyone has different maybe disabled. Like, for example, Giuseppe Verdi, when Verdi was in the conservatory, Verdi really couldn't play the piano because he had a problem in his hand. So I think we need to open the universe to all the senses, to create more space between all of it, between each other, and to find very new experience and find interesting things that we can create, because it's very, very interesting when the universe is open for all the people, for people with disability or with no disability.
Yeah, super important to connect with the universe and make sure that everybody's open to that, and therefore will be open to each other a lot more. So beautiful. Elizabeth?
I would say, I completely agree with Alan, and just thinking beyond yourself, putting yourself in someone else's situation and thinking about, how am I navigating my way around this website? Is it accessible for someone who may have a learning difference? Am I using accessible language? I think, just thinking beyond yourself and putting yourself in someone else's position who, is differently abled, is so important. I think some things that are not thought about in terms of a studio. The question before about accessible studio spaces, you know, people with autism, it massively affects the sound quality in a space. So am I accommodating the way that the sound is in that space, and is it too bright? You know, and they're just questions that can be asked to that individual. It doesn't have to be about kind of redesigning everything in the studio, but, you know, is this working for you? And again, that comes back to what I kind of started with, and it's communication, just clear communication.
Definitely. Yeah. The more we communicate, the more we'll connect. Thank you so much. Andrew?
I'd just like to remind everyone that at the beginning of this pandemic, disabled people were on the cusp of a real breakthrough. Our plays were on at the National Theatre. We were in the West End. Our art was in exhibition halls up and down the country. You know, the UK was a global leader in inclusive arts. And so I think it's really important that we all work together, artists, audiences, to really fight to ensure that we regain that position, to ensure that we don't become less diverse with fewer disabled artists, employees, and audience, and risk becoming more ableist. So it's important that we all commit to creating a more inclusive society, a more inclusive industry, because on the other side, quite frankly, we will all have been through too much to allow the old discriminatory barriers re-emerge to prevent inclusion.
Yeah, super poignant that you know, the fact that, you know, we were on the, you know, we were global leaders in terms of, you know, inclusivity and accessibility. You know, that's absolutely incredible, and that's something that we should be proud of. So we have to make sure that when we move forwards, we can not only achieve that but go beyond that, because if we don't, sorry, but quite frankly, I think we as a nation we should be ashamed of ourselves if we can't get ourselves to that point again. Then yeah, something dramatic really needs to change. And Joe?
Yeah, so I think the thing to think about moving forward is nothing is impossible. So it's almost like think that the impossible is possible. Sorry. You know, don't look at, okay, this can't be done and that can't be done. Look at what can be done to make changes, and what can be done. You know, it might look a little different to what we're used to seeing, but that's the exciting thing. You know, stepping into this territory of something that's new and it hasn't been done before, that's really, really exciting. And, you know, we should celebrate that. And yeah, that's just amazing. And also thank you as well.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Yeah, like uncertainty, it's a scary place. It's a scary place for people, but it can also be a beautiful place and lead us to some incredible things. You know, so I think, you know, we stand to gain a lot more from embracing uncertainty than we do to kind of like clinging on to certainty and the old ways and the safe ways and things like that. I think, you know, the more we can actually go out there and try new things that hasn't been done before, try new aesthetics, the much richer, you know, our sector and other sectors will be for that. So yeah, I'd just like to say massive respect and big thank you to our panelists. You have all been absolutely incredible, super inspired by you guys. Next level, my people. Sorry, you're getting me all excited. Yeah, just, you know, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being, you know, so open and honest, you know, and sharing such valuable information. I'd just like to thank the Royal Opera House, the BSL interpreters, everybody on this team that have worked really hard to bring to you insights tonight. I've been Nathan Geering. I just want to say thank you so much. One love, peace.